Portugal. You've probably heard of Portugal, that little nation on the Iberian Peninsula right next to Spain. And they share much more than just borders. They share a similar history, similar languages. They were also the first two colonial superpowers. But like all things, their empires came to a dramatic end. And then, Spain and Portugal shifted apart. Their destinies were no longer as intertwined as they were before. They went down very, very different paths. While Spain became a democracy, and then a kingdom again, tried democracy again, a fascist state, and then a kingdom again in the 70s, Portugal was a monarchy up until 1910. And nowadays, Portugal doesn't have a king anymore. But why? And who's left to claim the Portuguese throne? All these questions and more will be answered in today's video. To understand why Portugal no longer has a monarchy, we need to go back to the early 19th century and the reign of Queen Maria I of Portugal. She was known in Portugal as Maria the Pious, but in Brazil, she was known as Maria the Mad. In 1807, her son John, or in Portuguese, João, was made regent of the Portuguese kingdom. This was because of his mother's obvious mental instability, which she had been suffering from since the 1780s. In that same year, Prince João made the decision to move the Portuguese royal family and court to their main colony in Brazil, due to fear of being deposed by France's Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. After 8 years in 1815, Brazil was elevated to the status of a kingdom when Queen Maria was still alive. However, she would only reign for 3 months, and she was succeeded by her son, João, who became King João VI of Portugal and Brazil. João's early reign was filled with protests, as liberals wanted him to limit his power, and absolutists wanted him to retain absolute power, meaning that João needed to return to Portugal to stabilize the country. He left Brazil in the capable hands of his son and heir, Prince Pedro, also known as Don Pedro de Alcântara Francisco Antonio João Carlos Xavier de Paula Miguel Rafael Joaquim José Gonzaga Pascual Cipriano Serafim de Braganza Bourbon. Pedro was a liberal, much like his father. However, his brother, Infante Miguel, was not. Miguel was an absolutist and wanted Portugal to remain an absolute monarchy. So, the Mad Prince led an absolutist revolt in Portugal and was sent into exile. The newly re-established Portuguese parliament, which had not been summoned in 100 years, decided that it was time for the United Kingdom to end, and Brazil would resume its status as a colony. Pedro, who had spent most of his life in Brazil, decided to declare independence in 1822 with the full support of Brazil. Pedro was the first in line for the Portuguese throne, which, ironically enough, he would ascend to in 1825 when old man João died. This moment, in my opinion, sealed the fate of the House of Braganza, even though it might not have seemed so. So what happens next, you might ask? Well, when Pedro receives the crown of Portugal, he immediately abdicates it and gives it to his daughter. Gave it to her on the very, very small condition that she had to marry her uncle. Long story short, ladies' man Miguel is defeated after trying to seize the throne from his niece/wife-to-be, and Maria II eventually comes of age. Now this is where things really start to get cursed for the dynasty, because she marries a member of the junior house of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha-Kohari. Now, the Kohari branch of the dynasty, which by the way is the same dynasty that rules in the United Kingdom today, was cursed by a monk in the 18th century, and while the Braganzas had been faltering so far, this is where it really gets bad. I'm going to go through the list of successive Portuguese kings, but to keep in mind, there are 4 children that Maria and her husband Ferdinand, who by the way outlived 8 of his 11 children, had. They are, in order of birth, Pedro, Luis, João, and Augusto. Pedro succeeded his mother, who died while in childbirth in 1854, to the Portuguese throne at the age of 17. He would only reign for 7 years, dying at the age of 24 due to a cholera outbreak. He was then succeeded by his younger brother, Luis, who reigned from 61 to 89. He died at the age of 50, only having 2 surviving sons, the eldest of which was King Carlos of Portugal, who reigned a relatively stagnant nation that was declining in power, just like his father had. In 1908, King Carlos and his eldest son, Luis Felipe, were assassinated by radical Republicans, meaning that the kingdom was now ruled by the king's second son, Manuel. He would be the last king of Portugal, and the last male line member of this branch of the House of Braganza. In 1910, the Portuguese monarchy was overthrown by a revolution of republicanism. There were several attempts to restore the monarchy, all of which were condemned by Manuel, who A, was unfit for and did not like his position, and B, was a proud Portuguese patriot and did not want to see his country fall into civil war. Manuel lived until 1932, when he died. Now, here's a question. Who is the rightful successor to Manuel II, and who would be the rightful claimant to the Portuguese throne? Now let's go back to those sons of Maria II and the brother of Carlos I. Now, as implied but not mentioned, Pedro V died childless, and Luis only had 2 sons. But what about João and Augusto? Well, when it comes to Infante João, he died in the same epidemic as his brother Pedro V, and Augusto died childless at the age of 38. So now we move on to the son of Luis I, Afonso. Yes, Afonso. My name is Alfonso, not Afonso. I don't understand it either. Anyway, Afonso. Afonso also died childless in 1927. Correction, 1920. Meaning that Manuel truly was the last male line descendant of Maria II. So, who's left to claim the throne? Well, since every male in Maria II's line is dead, we have to go to the line of her uncle husband, Miguel. His great-grandson is still alive, and his name is Duarte Pio, Prince of Braganza. Duarte is in his 70s and was born in the 40s, and as mentioned, he is the great-grandson of Miguel I. Now, some of you might be saying that Miguel's line was disinherited by the king. Well, that line eventually made up with the rest of the house, and the law forbidding Miguel's descendants was repealed in 1950 by the Portuguese Republic. So, there you go. Duarte Pio is the rightful pretender to the House of Braganza in Portugal. Now, when it comes to Brazil, well, that's a completely different story.